Have we seen the last of Paul George in Philadelphia? Shams Charania reporting yesterday on Monday, March 17th, that Paul George received injections in his left adductor muscle and his left knee and has been ruled out for the rest of the season. It's been a very difficult and tough first year for Paul George in Philadelphia. So on today's show, we're going to explore what could be next for PG. Before we get into all that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Year-round Sixers coverage here on 76ers. Now you get news, rumors, analysis. We'll have plenty of free agency coverage and NBA draft coverage coming up, as well as live watch parties. We'll start to get into more of those next season. Hopefully they can make a playoff run and we can do some playoff watch parties. So hit that sub button. Let's get into today's show. So what could be next for Paul George in Philadelphia? What is his future in the city of brotherly love? Because we've heard some rumors and some reports that the Sixers could be looking to trade Paul George after just one season with the 76ers. And let's take a look at how that one season with the Sixers did go, because got to talk about his performance as a whole before we can talk about the next steps. Obviously, very disappointing year for Paul George when it comes to the counting stats, the analytics. No matter what way you slice it up, it wasn't a good year. You know, you expect someone like Paul George to carry a bigger offensive load when Joel Embiid misses as many games as he does. Just 16 points, not efficient either. 43% from the field and just 36% from three. And he had some of his worst numbers in 10-plus seasons. You look at his points per game, the lowest since 2011, 2012. Lowest field goal percentage in a few years since 2021, 2022. Also his lowest three-point percentage since 2021, 2022. His lowest amount of free throw attempts per game since 2011, 2012 at just, 2010, 2011 at just 2.4, and his worst true shooting percentage in a couple years as well. And it wasn't just the lack of efficiency. It was a lack of efficiency compared with the type of shots he was taking. Here you can see this graph shows Paul George's shot distance with the Thunder, the Clippers, and the Sixers. You can see at the top row, average shot distance, the largest it's been with the Sixers this year, an average shot distance of 18 feet. That is longer than with the Thunder and with the Clippers. What does that mean? He's taking shots from farther out on average. And you can see percent of field goal attempts between 0 and 3 feet, that second row right there, just above 0.105, just above 10%, way lower than it was with the Thunder and with the Clippers. What the problem with Paul George that's going on right now is he's unable to get by defenders, unable to create looks for himself at the rim. As a result, he's settling for longer shots, longer twos, longer threes, and he's become more inefficient. So how can you make Paul George an effective offensive basketball player again? Because if he really is cooked, if he's washed, and he can't get to the rim, get to the free throw line, create his own shot, and he's settling for jumpers, how can you make him an effective basketball player? Because he hasn't really been that this past season. And if it continues like that, it's going to be rough for the Sixers if they hold on to this contract. I think the best way to make him effective again is to reduce his role. And now, of course, that comes with hopefully Joel Embiid coming back healthy so he can be more of that third option. But I think that also can be aided by the increased play and hopefully bringing back somebody like a Quentin Grimes, who in 17 games with Philadelphia since he was traded from the Dallas Mavericks, I mean, look at these numbers. This is miles ahead of what Paul George has given you at about 21 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, 51% from the field, and nearly 40% from three, while carrying a massive offensive load for the Sixers team, while Maxey, Paul George, Embiid, and others have all missed games. I mean, just take a look at these last 5 games for Quentin Grimes. 25 points, 35 points, 29, 28, a career-high 46 to go along with 13 rebounds and 4 assists in overtime against the Houston Rockets. Not to mention a couple games in there, 13 rebounds, 7 rebounds, some high assist games, 6, 5, 6. Quentin Grimes is the type of player who can take on a larger offensive role heading into next year and help Paul George do less on the offensive side of the ball so he can hopefully become a little bit more efficient. Same for a player on that wing like Justin Edwards, who has really come on this season, being an undrafted free agent this past year out of Kentucky in these last 15 games, getting more opportunity, 10 points, 3 assists, decent efficiency, 43% from the field, 34% from three. He's another guy on that wing who can eat into some of those Paul George minutes, take on a bigger load offensively next year after hopefully making some improvements this offseason, and allow Paul George to not have to do as much offensively and be more of a role player. That's the ideal world for Paul George to become a better and more efficient offensive player. And it sounds great in a vacuum, but the problem with reducing his role, if that's the only way to make him more effective, which I believe it is he's not being paid like a role player. He's being paid like an all-NBA caliber superstar. You could see over the next 3 years, upwards of $51 million, $54 million, and $56 million is owed to him over the next 3 seasons, and you're not paying somebody who is just a role player that amount of money. And so, although I think in the ideal world, the Sixers would like to keep Paul George and find a way to make him more effective, I think he might be cooked. And if the only way to make him better is to reduce his role, I don't think you want to reduce his role and still pay him, superstar level money. So, look, in my opinion, I think Paul George has played his last game for the Philadelphia 76ers, now ruled out for the rest of the season, and it was a very difficult season for Paul George. Offensively, the numbers were way down. His efficiency, his effectiveness, not able to get to the rim. I think there's players on the Sixers roster, like a Quentin Grimes, like a Justin Edwards, that can take even further steps next season offensively and replace some of that role that Paul George leaves behind. And look, his contract is just way too large for the Sixers to allow to just sit there on the books for the next few years if he's not going to be an effective player. So it was a big-time swing and a miss for the Sixers, but I do not see Paul George being on this 76ers roster come next season. But what do you think? Will the Sixers trade Paul George this offseason? Give me a Y for yes, N for no. Predict it down in the comment section for me if you think Philly will move off of Paul George. Now, of course, it takes two teams to make a deal. And coming up next here on the show, we're going to explore some different avenues the Sixers could go if they do want to pursue a potential Paul George trade, because I can sit here and say that I want to trade Paul George, and the Sixers can sit there and say they want to trade Paul George, but there needs to be another team willing to get in there and take on the player. So we're going to explore some of that coming up, so don't go anywhere. But really quick, before we get to that, I want to tell you guys about a great deal over at Fanatics. This 76ers polo, I've been telling you all about this for a little bit, and the deal right now is even better than it once was. This polo was $85, and for the past few weeks or so, it was in the $60 range. Now it's down to just $57. Chatsports.com/76polo. You can look good. You can feel good. Represent the Sixers, who hopefully will be a team you'll be proud to root for next season as compared to this year. I'll have that link in the comment section as well as the description of today's show. Again, that is chatsports.com/76polo. All right, so there are really two different types of teams that I think would be interested or at least have the potential to trade for a Paul George type player. Number one is a team who thinks they're maybe one piece away and they can add Paul George and make themselves a bona fide contender. Now, unfortunately, I was scouring on the internet and searching through, looking at different possibilities of teams that I think might be interested in adding Paul George as that last piece. And honestly, I wasn't able to find a whole lot of teams that I think would be willing to give up assets and take on that Paul George salary to make themselves a contender. Now, I did see this trade idea floating out there on the internet, and it did intrigue me a little bit. Really the only one where I could see the Sixers trading away Paul George and not having to give up other draft picks, which we'll get to in a second. In this three-team idea, the Sixers, you get Terrence Mann, you get Karis LeVert from the Atlanta Hawks, you get a first-round pick in 2030 from the Hawks. You also get a first-round pick in 2031 from the Warriors. In this deal, the Hawks get Paul George. They also get Trace Jackson-Davis and Brandon Podziemski from the Golden State Warriors, who give up those two young players as well as the pick to the Sixers in exchange for Onyeka Okongwu. It's a very interesting deal. If I'm the Sixers, I make this, no question about it. You're telling me I can get two decent role players plus two first-round picks for a player like Paul George? And the Hawks, from their perspective, Trae Young Is he 1 foot in, 1 foot out? Does he need to be convinced that this team can be a contender? Maybe the Hawks can convince themselves that Paul George can be that last piece, and they still get 2 other good role players. And for the Warriors, Onyeka Okongwu was a really, really good young center, and I doubt the Hawks would want to give him up. But, for those 3 players, they might be able to, and the Warriors would finally be able to get a center that I think really fits their play style with Onyeka Okongwu. So that's really the only type of deal I could see Paul George going to a team that at least views themselves as of a contender, but are the Hawks really a contender? I don't know. The more realistic avenue for a potential Paul George trade, in my opinion, is sending him to a rebuilding team who would take on the salary of Paul George, but would also want picks back from the Sixers to take on that big salary. And there are a few different teams that I think would be willing to go down that route in order to get more valuable picks as they continue their rebuild, because these rebuilding teams won't care too much about that big salary, although 3 years left in that deal is kind of a big deal. First up, I have the Wizards. Now, if they get the number 1 overall pick and they land Cooper Flagg, maybe they aren't as interested in this because they might see themselves a little bit farther along in their rebuild if they're able to get a generational type of player like Flagg. But theoretically, Sixers take on Jordan Poole, who's probably not a part of the Wizards' long-term future anyways, bring Rashawn Holmes back to Philadelphia, and you also get a second-round pick back from the Wizards. Now, you do have to give up Paul George, of course, and 2 future first-round picks. That's the asking price to take on that Paul George contract. That's how bad it is. So if you're the Sixers, are you willing to give up 2, potential premium first-round picks? Now, they do also have the Clippers pick in 2028, so they're sending their own pick here. So at least you still have that going. But those are picks far in the future. You don't know what this team will look like. Potentially no Joel Embiid, and obviously trading away Paul George. You still have Tyrese Maxey. You still have Jared McCain, Quentin Grimes ideally, and hopefully a young player you draft in this year's draft. But 2 first-round picks, that is a lot to give up just to get off of Paul George. I got the Portland Trailblazers as well as a team that could be interested in PG. Now, in this trade, the Sixers bring back process legend Jeremy Grant, as well as Robert Williams, 2 players that, Jeremy Grant on a bad contract as well, not quite as bad as Paul George. Blazers haven't really been able to get off of that since they signed him to that big deal. Robert Williams always injured, but if he's out there, I think he would be a really, really good starting center option if Joel Embiid is not going to play next year, and also a really good backup option if you let go of Andre Drummond, although Adam Bone has been showing some really good things. And in this deal, you only have to give up Paul George and 1 first-round pick, so I think I'd rather go this option because with the Wizards, you bring in Jordan Poole. I don't love the fit here in Philadelphia. At least Jeremy Grant, Robert Williams would fill some needs on this team. And then last one here with the Chicago Bulls. In this deal, you bring in Lonzo Ball. Interesting, intriguing option. I think, he could come off the bench behind Maxey. I think he'd be fine playing with Maxey as well as someone that can guard players on the wing and also run that offense and get some good open looks for your other players. Nikola Vucevic as well coming back to Philadelphia, the team that originally drafted him way back when. As a backup / starting center option, again, depending on what happens with Embiid, is making a lot of money, so maybe you find another team to reroute Vucevic to, but he has to be in here for salary purposes. Then a young player in Julian Phillips as well to round out that salary. In this deal, though, you give up those 2 first-round picks plus a second. Bulls get Paul George. They take his salary, again, with the idea of, sure, we'll take on Paul George, but you have to give us picks as well. I'd probably rather only give up the 1, but look, if you have to give up 2 first-round picks for Paul George, I think you have to do it to be able to give yourself the flexibility to fix this team, because right now, with Paul George, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey all under contract at those large numbers, it's almost impossible to reformulate the roster in a way to create a true winner unless Paul George all of a sudden, turns back the clock, which I don't think he's really able to. Now, that being said, people might be looking at all these trades saying, Paul George is never going to be traded. Who would want to trade for Paul George? That is never going to happen. Look, people say this all the time in the NBA, that this guy won't be traded for this reason. Nobody wants this contract. This guy's too good to be traded. All it takes is one team to be interested. All it takes is one team to say, hey, I'm willing to take on a couple picks, and I'll take on that Paul George contract, that salary, and I'll give you a couple older guys that don't fit my timeline. So it's not as ridiculous as people think, and I really do believe the Sixers will do everything in their power to try to trade Paul George this offseason. Before we get out of here, if you want even more Sixers content, every single day. You can give us a follow over on our Instagram page at 76ers Now IG. Posted a lot of short form content on there, game updates, game recaps, other things like that. And as well, I'm also on Twitter at Jake Chipper, just surpassed 200 followers on there. I tweet out whenever we post a new video, as well as just talking ball, talking Sixers, Eagles as well, NCAA tournament coming up, whatever you want. So give us a follow over there. Appreciate you tuning in to today's show, and we'll see you next time here on 76ers Now.